Good day, investors. I'm your host, Jared Bowers. And today I'd like to tell you about two different people. About the same age, same basic demographics, similar job title, same relationship status, roughly the same income, for now. See if you notice any differences. The first story is of Alex. Okay, less of a story and more of a look into his average day. Alex wakes up for the day at the same time he's been waking up for years. So it was pretty easy to do. Starting off feeling pretty good. After getting up and spending some time in study and reflection, he doesn't really feel like working out, if he's being honest. But he knows he'll feel better and perform better during the day if he does. He's been pretty consistent with his movement for years. And Alex also has a goal of entering a fitness competition with his buddy next summer. So he gets to it. And when he's done, as usual, he's very glad that he did it. When it's time for breakfast, he grabs what he's prepped the night before, which helps him ignore the cereal and granola bars and the leftover pie. He has breakfast with his wife while the kids are running around getting ready. It's a nice connection point as a couple that they make a point to do as often as they can. He has some time after breakfast, so he works on a personal project that he's been building out for quite a while. It's getting close to the next phase, which is exciting, considering it's been in the works for a few years. And his goal with it is incremental progress. Alex's workday at the office is a lot of the normal minutia, with a few curveballs thrown in. But there are two big projects he knows need to be brought forward. And he makes sure that one gets priority for a chunk of time in the morning, and the second gets priority in the early afternoon. That morning project is more immediate. But the other one has huge potential, but probably not for quite a while. Late in the afternoon, he gets a reminder to make the monthly deposits for the new house fund and the kids' college fund. Retirement funds are already automatically handled. And while he does that, he checks the monthly budget and sees that they were well within budgets last month. They have extra money sitting in checking. So he kicks some extra into the new house fund. Alex and his wife have been working on that for over 5 years already. And he thinks to himself, dang, it seems like it was just recently that they started that. But now it has a balance of over half of what their original goal was. With the extra equity in their current home from the strong housing market, he guesses it'll only be a few years before they can build or buy their dream home. His evening is mostly invested with and in his family. They rarely miss family dinners together. Something that they've been prioritizing ever since they got married, and it's become even more important as their kids grow up. 2 preteens now. Wow. It feels like it was just yesterday when he and his brother were that age. So he knows how fast that time flies by. Something came up in conversation around the dinner table that makes it clear that he needs to have a challenging conversation with one of his boys, and it shouldn't be put off. He's not looking forward to that, but he knows it's best to tackle it right away. Before bed, the next day is prepped for. To-do list, food, workout plan, and then he has some time to do some reading. Not something that he's able to do every evening, so it feels like a treat when he can. The bedtime is nailed, and he knows that the next day is going to present its own challenges and unique tasks. And he also knows that tomorrow is going to look remarkably similar to today. And that is a good thing. He falls asleep thinking about the future, and he's looking forward to it. So that's a day in the life of Alex. Our second look into a day in the life is with Brad. Brad wakes up late for the day at a random time because he forgot to set his alarm. Kinda hard to remember to do when you fall asleep on the couch at not so sure o'clock and eventually find your way to bed sometime in the middle of the night. And holy cow, it was hard to wake up. He can't remember the last time he woke up feeling refreshed. After getting up, he briefly considers the promise he made to himself that he was going to work out today. Start working out today. He hasn't for a while. But 2 big things stand in the way. He doesn't have time, and he really doesn't feel like it. So it's a pretty easy no. His back hurts anyway. For breakfast, Brad grabs what is fast and close at hand: cereal and granola bars. And hey, look, leftover pie! First win of the day. He really needed that win. He has no time after breakfast, so he hurries out the door and passes no fewer than 5 started but stalled projects around the house, some of which have been open for years. Brad's workday is a lot of the normal minutia, which consumes his day. There are 2 big projects that he knows need to be brought forward, but the emails, calls, and putting out fires just takes all of his limited energy. Plus, he's been dealing with this big energy slump in the middle of the day, and he wishes that he had another piece of that pie to help him solve it. He didn't have time to pack his lunch, so thankfully, DoorHub's new delivery service, Gruber Dash, brings him some sweet and spicy taco wands. He gets an email during lunch, so far the only bright spot of the day, reminding him that one of the projects is more immediate and needs a deliverable. He writes a reply telling them that it's going to have to wait until next week sometime. Too many other things just got in the way. He gets a reminder to make the monthly investment deposits for the new house and the kids' college fund. He makes a mental note to turn those reminders off. He heard on an investing podcast that setting up those accounts would be a good idea to do, but he never got around to doing it. Plus, he and his family like the house they rent. The plan was that renting would allow them to save and invest more instead of buying that starter house when they had a chance to. He doesn't let himself think about the equity he'd have if they'd done that 5 years ago. The market's been crazy hot, and now even a starter home is further out of their reach. There's no way they could even afford to buy the house they rent right now. Families like his just can't get ahead. Not in this economy. And for college? Well, that's what student loans are going to have to be for. But he thinks to himself, good thing we have that extra cash flow each month from stopping those 401k contributions, because we just got notice that our rent is being jacked up in a few months. Greedy landlords. But he's looked, and if they moved, it would be to a worse place at an even higher rent. He gets home exhausted, starving, and feeling like he worked all day but didn't accomplish much, which doesn't feel like much of a win. His evening is mostly spent in front of the TV, as is dinner. The family eats on the go between weeknight activities. Brad's wife says that they should do family dinners sometime, something they both had growing up, but they have 2 preteens that have no interest in talking to them. Plus, they'd just be looking at their phones the whole time, which ticks Brad off. He can't remember the last time that he had much of a conversation with his kids. After dinner, the night just kind of extends. His wife reminds him of the bathroom trim project that he said he'd work on, which starts an argument, which reminds them both of an unresolved argument from 2 nights ago on a similar topic, and they both decide it's just easier to walk away. Bedtime is sometime after midnight, not sure when, but the Netflix "Are You Still Watching" screen suggests that it's been at least a couple hours that he's been asleep on the couch. Brad knows that the next day is going to present its own challenges and unique tasks, and he's worried that it's going to look remarkably similar to the day that he just finished. He falls back to sleep thinking, man oh man, the weekend cannot get here fast enough. Okay, those are 2 different looks into 2 different days in the life. From the outside, these 2 people will look like they live very similar lives. The raw stats are similar. Mid-30s, similar job. They live in a similar house. Comparable income, marital status, number of kids. Oh, and I forgot to give you this wrinkle. Alex, the first guy, and Brad are brothers. So that also means that they had the same upbringing, education, and socioeconomic experiences. But now for my questions. You guys are so darn lucky. I'm going to do stories and questions at the beginning of this episode. What's the difference? Well, based on the day in the life of each of them that I laid out, the answer is pretty obvious. Everything is the difference. One's investing really well and the other isn't. So is that the difference? Yes, but I think we can be more specific than that. If I were to identify a single difference between these 2 people, it would be their time horizon. One clearly has a long-term time horizon tuned to months, years, and even decades, and the other has a short-term time horizon tuned mostly to today. and at the farthest to the weekend. Now, for my next question, do you think that you can see their future? I bet you can. Trace the trajectories based on the investments they are and are not making. And what do you expect the outcomes to be 5 years down the road? How about 10 years? 20 years? Consider that. If you trace the trajectory of the first brother that we talked about, Alex, for the next 20 years, you'd be shocked if he wasn't much more successful in pretty much every domain of life. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that he'd eventually become the CEO of his company. All his kids graduated from great schools and are living great lives, and he and his wife started a nonprofit. Oh, and now he's running Ironmans. Because, of course, why not? If you trace the trajectory of our other brother, Brad, for 20 years, you'd be shocked if he was successful in most domains of life. You wouldn't be surprised if you heard that he was divorced, estranged from his kids, and working a dead-end job that he hated. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But knowing what we know, that is not an unlikely outcome. And to be clear, Alex isn't a saint, and Brad isn't a bad guy. What Alex does doesn't make him better as a person, but it definitely makes his life better, and it makes success more likely. And Brad, who's struggling, isn't dumb. He's tired, he's reactive, and he's living the way that we tend to do when our time horizon collapses to the present. And when we look around us, Brad is definitely not unusual. So now for the central question of the episode. Why do we care about time horizon? Well, it represents a critically important concept that deserves a clear message, which is that of everything we talk about invested, the time horizon that we approach investing in life with is probably the biggest single determining factor of what we put our resources into in the first place and the direction that those investments go. There is not a bigger factor that determines which accounts grow and which accounts shrink. We talk about a lot of important things in this podcast, but it is not an exaggeration to say that time horizon is and should be at the top of our list. You will, without a doubt, find a very high correlation between the quality and direction and magnitude of someone's outcomes and how far into the future they are taking seriously. And when I say time horizon, I'm not talking about worrying or ruminating. I'm not talking about fantasizing or daydreaming. I'm not talking about a vague hope that things will work out in the future. I'm talking about thinking seriously, planning for, taking actionable steps towards some point or many points in the future. And the range of that is vast. It spans the range of our human lives. Beyond our lives, to be fair, because we can plan for and have an impact beyond our lifespan. Another big reason we care about time horizon is because it is one of the 3 macros, for goodness sake. Much of what we talk about related to everything is investing is grounded in our investment of time, often as the most limited and limiting resource. Our other 2 macros being energy and money, but time, as we've talked about, back in episode 3, I believe, it's not just the most limited for most of us, it's also our most unique macronutrient of investing. It can't be saved up, for one. Money can sit unused for a long time, and then it can be used to its fullest effect when it's put into practice, when it is in fact invested. Energy can be conserved and saved up to an extent before it's deployed in the future. But with time, we don't have that luxury. Time is always being invested. We can't pause it. We can't put a hold on it like we can with cash. We don't have an account where we can store it up. Time is the investment macro that refuses to be held back. It is always moving. It is always being allocated. And so if we're careless with our time, and with our time horizon through which we invest, we are being careless and wasteful with the most valuable resource that we have in life. Life can also be described as time. The time that we have. If we don't have life, we don't have time. If we don't have time, we don't have life. The other 2 macros we can live without, at least for a period of time. Not so when it comes to our most precious resource. And calling back to episode 4, when we explored wealthy versus poor mindset, we covered the 3 most important aspects of that. Our time horizon, whether we have a scarcity or abundance mentality, and whether or not we take ownership. With a short time horizon, with a scarcity mindset and with a refusal to take ownership, that removes positive returns from the equation. It takes them off the table. Versus, if we have a long time horizon, an abundance approach to life, and we take ownership, that is where all the returns start, grow, and are achieved. Those three mindsets are the prerequisites. But above anything else, even above scarcity versus abundance, even above ownership, is our time horizon. The poor mindset and poor outcomes live inside of a short-term focus. Can't look beyond the weekend. Views time as something to be spent cheaply. Very little focus beyond the immediate. The wealthy mindset and where wealth is achieved and built is with a long-term focus. That focus views time as precious. And those with that approach don't just live for years and decades from now. Someone with a long-term focus lives for right now and for decades from now. Because of that, they invest their resources intentionally, especially time. This discussion deserves an important caveat. With a proper long-term focus, the present becomes of critical importance. Because if all we are is future maximizing machines, we actually short-circuit ourselves from making important investments today, right now, some of which will look like they're just for the immediate. Investments like taking time to slow down, observing something beautiful, spending time with our family, having ice cream on the vacation. A long-term time horizon does not mean avoidance of any short-term gratification, pleasure, or enjoyment seeking. The important point that I'm trying to make is that long-term thinking is not anti-present. It's anti-present only. The wealthy mindset is not refusing to enjoy today. It's refusing to sacrifice what we can have 10, 20, or 30 years from now for a cheaper or non-existent version of that today. The poor mindset sends the bill to your future self. The wealthy mindset sends deposits into the future for you to be able to enjoy and benefit from. If we stop to consider the spectrum of time horizon, from ultra short to very long, why the outcome set changes becomes clear. Some people live in 24-hour increments. They cannot think about anything beyond what is immediately in front of them or just coming up. Our opening story with Brad illustrated that. When your time horizon is tuned to the immediate, the short term, it takes almost all meaningful returns off the table. That's a tough place to operate from. One step away from that is what I see in the majority: living for the weekend. These folks at least are willing to put in the hours for 5 days so that they can get to the couple days that they really want. That time frame tuning isn't great, but it's definitely better than just the immediate, the next 24 hours. Just by tuning their time frame out from the immediate up to the weekend, the returns and opportunity for returns are dialed up massively. Somebody might hear me talk about people who live for the weekend as though they are in the worst category, that they can and should do better, that they should expand their time horizon beyond that. And that's true, but they are not in the worst category because they are still getting, how can I say this? Positive returns are still available to them with that living for the weekend mentality. Now, unfortunately, they're typically sorely disappointed when that weekend rolls around and it doesn't live up to the hype that they were hoping that it would. And often, with that attitude, that's when someone's time horizon gets shortened to hours because they become hedonic pleasure-seeking machines for that 24 to 48 hour period that they work so hard to achieve. Funny thing is, on their 5-day long time scale, they're actually able to make productive investments that result in meaningful outcomes, even if all it is a paycheck and a job kept. Once the weekend arrives and their time scale reverts to 24 hours, what they were looking forward to most often just ends up costing them the resources they were able to accumulate during that 5-day period leading up to it. That's not a very fair trade-off. Okay, as we stretch out our time horizon, there are people who think in months. That is a huge unlock when it comes to returns. That's when the doors are open for things like having responsibility over other people, over real meaningful things. A time horizon that stretches out, at least for months, opens up the door for pursuing education in a meaningful way. The way that we interact and treat people around us is going to change for the better. On a months-long time scale, you can consider the impact of your actions on your relationships beyond just the immediate. It's no longer just transactional or about the pleasure or conflict in front of us at that immediate moment. Thinking in a period of months opens the door for them to think about their personal health. From a diet and exercise standpoint, taking care of themselves, because it is over a months-long timescale that progress can actually be seen in that domain. The same thing applies when it comes to developing meaningful relationships. Weekend friends are fun, but they're typically not invested in. Having a timescale of months allows for deeper connection, more meaningful connection. Then, we step up to those who are able to focus on and have a time horizon that reaches out years. That is where real returns start getting unlocked. That is when, on the business side of things, real things can be built, real skills can be developed, real responsibility can be taken on. In education, real expertise and knowledge can be developed over years. On the relationship side, that is where true, deep, meaningful connection can be achieved. Important things like love can be fostered. Trust can be developed. That years-long horizon stretches out and magnifies the benefits of a healthy focus on health. Practices and habits that can provide massive returns, if practiced consistently, for a timescale that reaches into years, can and will have huge positive returns. Years is also where spiritual progress exists. And then there is the decades-long timescale, which is rare but powerful. It's rare to find many people that think and focus on a decades-long timescale, but they do exist. And that decades-long timescale can apply to every area we talked about. Money, health, relationships, skills, spiritual health. It opens up the doors and magnifies the returns. That is where the truest, largest, best returns exist in every domain of life that has any level of value. Decades is also where one of the most powerful forces that exists in the universe is unlocked, which is compounding. Compound returns, exponential growth. Those start to appear on the years-long timescale, but they don't really manifest until you start looking at decades. And that is especially true when it comes to money. But I will make the case that it is also true with the other areas of life that we care about. It is those exponential returns, non-linear growth of the deposits that we've made, that result in nearly all of the balance and separates the rich from the poor in any domain of life that you look at. And one of the things that makes our time horizon powerful is not just the time that elapses where good investments are allowed to do their work. It reveals how long you're willing to make deposits for, and then give those inputs the time needed to work before you demand an outcome. Patience is a huge part of this, if that isn't obvious. Without patience that at least stretches out months, even better years, and ideally decades, you will give up. We sell prematurely as a result of our short-term focus. We give up the best returns in life before they ever had a chance to give us small incremental returns, much less exponential ones. If you judge the portfolio of money over days or weeks or quarters, you're probably not going to see the point of investing. The returns will often be disappointingly small. If you judge the results of your workouts and nutrition plan you're following on a timescale of days or weeks or even months, you're going to be disappointed with the results in most cases. And that disappointment is going to result in quitting. If we judge the challenges, successes, conversations, growth, regress in our close relationships, let's say our marriage, based on how it feels in the short term, we are going to be disappointed and we are going to want to give up. And we are going to want to stop making investments. Same thing with parenting. Same thing with career. Same thing with our faith, with our purpose that we have in life. If we are judging those areas by the immediate feeling or the immediate payoff, then those are the only types of returns that are going to be available to us. The shallow, small, immediate ones. Sometimes okay, but tiny compared to the results that are available to us in the long term. Our time horizon gives us the scale over which an investment is allowed to prove itself. And only in the long term does the patience that is required to let it happen exist. But one of the challenges that we face is that we are wired for short-term gratification. It is built into us. I think we can thank most of human history for this bent. Our current reality of this amazing world that we live in, of incredible abundance, is just a speck, barely a footnote, on the timescale of human history, almost all of which was dominated by periods of people just scraping by to survive. They had to focus on the short term to make it through the day safely with enough food. This short-term attention focus was not a bug. It was a survival feature. Food now mattered. Shelter now mattered. Danger now mattered. Pain now mattered. The immediate tribe around us and their survival mattered. Even the weather that we experienced in a day mattered tremendously. And that developed in us an innate, inborn, genetically driven drive to survival and grabbing wins and pleasure in the immediate. But that focus doesn't do us many favors in the modern world, where most of us live, with the incredible abundance that we're surrounded by. Survival has mostly been solved for. Long-term stewardship of incredible resources has not been solved for, which is a big reason why we struggle with keeping a long-term focus. If we were dozens or hundreds of generations into vast wealth and abundance, which I hope the future eventually is, we would probably be working with brains and genes and mental models that would support us in managing it well. But the good news is that learning to manage it well is fully in the cards. And it's not luck of the draw. Unless it was a complete accident that you found this podcast. Then maybe luck of the draw factored in at some level. If we identify and then practice doing the right thing for long enough, we won't have to fight our short-term survival instinct-driven brains, at least as much. But, man oh man, does short-term gratification have a powerful gravity to it. Our modern lives reveal this to be all too true. We don't need to cite a bunch of scientific studies to prove what every one of our lives will fully attest to. Every parent, every person who's been on a diet, every investor, which is all of us, every student, every married person, everyone with a phone and an internet connection knows this is true. The immediate pulls harder than the future does. Our instinct and our drive towards short-term gratification versus long-term gratification is much more powerful. The phone beats the book. The dessert beats the roasted vegetables. The couch beats the workout. The easy answer or the avoidance beats the hard conversation. Panic selling beats staying invested. Buying the thing beats saving and investing the money. Letting the kid have the screen, the treat, the toy beats dealing with the whining and the fit. The shout of the immediate payoff is so much louder than the whisper of the long-term payoff. But the problem with that is the returns are completely mismatched. Going for the short-term payoff, the returns are small and immediate, but more likely to be negative the farther out you look. Investing in the long-term payoff, the returns are massive and likely positive, but they can feel like they take forever to arrive. Even worse, investing in the long term is more likely to look like a negative the shorter your viewing window is. Okay, let me see if I can explain it better. The payoff of the short-term decision is positive right now, and the costs usually exist in the future, often fully avoidable in the present. The payoff of the long-term decision is usually negative right now. You're sacrificing or doing something difficult, and fully unavoidable in the present. The returns only show up down the road. So this means, when someone's view is tuned fully to the short term, it will appear that the only logical thing to do is to make short-term optimizing decisions. They're wrong, and they're going to get poor returns because of it, but with that short-term view, that is not an illogical approach, at least to them, because that's all they can see. It really does seem to make sense to focus on the immediate. The return profile doesn't just make it better to invest for the long term. It makes it crucial that we invest in that direction. But that short-term pull makes it very difficult to do so. Let's consider this. Anytime we kick a can down the road, don't address a problem, don't pursue an opportunity, don't learn what can be learned, don't pay a bill or save for a goal or invest in a way that can grow, we are being really awful to our future selves. We kick problems down the road so that current us doesn't have to deal with them. But the result of that is that we hand ourselves future bills, future debt. We hand our future selves extra weight that needs to be carried or lost. We hand our future selves challenges in relationships, underdeveloped skills, unresolved conflict, all of which have account balances, the wrong kind, that grow through compounding. We hand ourselves, our future selves, underfunded accounts and have consequences today that we didn't feel like dealing with that then compound and got bigger. The more unkind we are to our future selves, the shorter our time horizon is. And based on this type of behavior, we can conclude one of two things. We either have an exceptionally high opinion of how capable our future selves are, that we'll be able to handle all of this garbage, or we must conclude that we hate them, that we despise our future selves. But our future self is the most important person in our lives. We just haven't met them yet. But we are right now a version of our future selves that our previous self was either kind to or an asshole to. If we can figure out how to treat our future selves like a current friend that we really care about, then we might be able to do things differently. We would look at the decisions that we have, that we're making, and say, man, I really don't want his life to suck. So I'm going to do what I can now to make his life better, because he is really important to me. We do not want to treat our future selves like they're our cleanup crew. By the way, it's illogical to conclude that it's the first option, that we believe our future self is highly capable and will be able to fix all of it. Because the way that our future self becomes capable is through properly handling tasks, problems, responsibilities in the present, which in that case is not us right now. It can't be that first option if we are practicing staying that same can kicker right now. We get better at what we practice, so we'll just become a more adept can kicker in the future. Let's talk about recognizing the problem. It can be really hard to recognize whether we are focused on the long term or the short term. It's easy to see it in others. It's tempting to look at the people around us who are stuck in a short-term decision time frame and are collecting all the terrible returns that are being generated as really stupid people. Why can't they see it? It's so obvious. How can they not see beyond what's right in front of their face? But that's the issue. All they can see is what's right there, immediate. They are doing what seems rational to them. And it isn't that they're dumb, it's that they are stuck in a short-term cycle that they can't see out of or past. The same thing happens to us when we're stuck in a short-term cycle, and it's really hard to see and recognize. And without recognizing it, there's little hope for change. But I have some ideas for you. Most of the time, when we're stuck in a short-term focus rut, we will be able to convince ourselves that we aren't, because we're thinking about the long term in those cases. But here's the difference. We are worrying about the future. We aren't planning for it, facilitating better outcomes for it, or investing in it. When we're stuck in a short-term spiral, big or small, we definitely think about the future. But it's mostly from the standpoint of worry, anxiety, fear, and avoidance. So that's one simple test to gauge our time frame and our time horizon. But here's another test you can use. Going back to our opening story, thinking through the story of our day can help with recognizing our own time horizon. So try this. Tell the story of your day in the same pattern that I told those two stories at the start of this episode. If you are investing in your education, if you are putting money to work in the market, if you are focused on developing long-term relationships with people that you care about, if you have a spiritual practice that you're making deposits into and seeing progress in, if quality time with family is being prioritized, if you're making purposeful deposits in your health, then that is proof that your timescale, at least in those certain areas of your life, stretches into the years mark, which is a really good sign. But if we don't have those things, or if we just feel like those things are struggling, then that can be an indication that our timescale is dipping down into months, weeks, or even days. To be clear, I struggle with my own time horizon swinging around. For me, conflict, loss, and uncertainty will collapse my time horizon to the immediate. One reason I decided to write about this and explore this topic in depth, time horizon, is because I recognize a bifurcation in my own approach to my time horizon. I am expert, PhD level, in long-term time horizon in some areas, but I am kindergarten level in others. And I have another tool for you. The last way I'd like to talk about how you can test how far out your default time horizon setting is set to is by augmenting one of our tools that we talked about all the way back in episode 2, the Mindshare Audit. This is a tool that's going to recur and come up again in future podcasts, the Mindshare Audit, because it is so useful. But in this case, we'll use it to test our time horizon. As a reminder, consider what things, circumstances, opportunities, pursuits occupy the majority of your mind share when your mind is drifting, when you don't have much else to actively think about, when you don't have something to occupy your thoughts, a current task, an active problem, a live conversation, or working your way through your to-do list. Where does your mind go? Where does it wander to when you're taking a shower, when you're out walking in nature, when you're on a drive in the car by yourself with no headphones in, not singing along to music? There's a lot that this exercise can set us up for. One of which is helping us identify our priorities and categorize where they fall from an over, under, or proper allocation standpoint. That was the point of the original exercise when we first talked about it in episode 2. But the other thing, or at least one of the other things, that this exercise can reveal is our default time frame. Because we spend most of our time mostly thinking about near-term things. And that's not a bad thing. And that's not a criticism. I do the same thing. Because that is what life requires. We live in the world in the current moment. We have to focus on now if we're going to make progress. Focusing on the present and the near future is a good thing. But if that is only where our focus is tuned to, then we need to make an adjustment. We need to try to stretch out our time horizon. Our time horizon is like a muscle. It can be stretched and it can be grown. So when you've identified those 3 or 4 things that your mind tends to settle on to think about, to dream about, to look forward to worry about, then evaluate each of them. How far out is the time horizon on those things? And is it focused on a worry, anxiety, fear standpoint, or is it focused on a building, investing, excited standpoint? And thankfully for you, in this exercise today, I'm going to be a lot less judgmental on what you are ruminating on, and this time focus a lot more on what it says about your time horizon. A lot of us think about money. That's a big place where our minds tend to drift to think about, to ruminate on, to plan for, wonder about, to daydream. Running what-if scenarios in good and bad directions, thinking about what we're going to do with our money or how we're going to get more of it. And how we think about that can tell us whether we're investing well or poorly in that direction. But, powerfully for this exercise, it can reveal our time horizon. Over what time span, where in the future are those thoughts about money occurring? For a lot of people, they're worried about having enough money to get through the week. They're wondering if they're going to be able to purchase that thing in the next few days. Or they're thinking about how they're going to spend a bunch of money this weekend. Maybe they're thinking about the overtime that they're planning on putting in so that they can have the money to spend on that thing that they want. If that is primarily where your thoughts land on the time horizon front when you think about money, then that is an indication of a shorter term time horizon. Then on the other end, for others, their mindset drifts to the very long term. Am I on track for retirement? Maybe thinking about college expenses that are coming up for a child or grandchild. Maybe they're thinking about a big trip, travel that is planned for the far future that is going to require money, and what their plan is to save for it. This is not definitive, but that is an indication of a much longer time frame when it comes to our money. And then there's everything that falls in the middle. Expenses or opportunities that fall into months or years from now. Cars, career opportunities, tuition, investments, buying or selling a home. And you might expect me to say that it's best to only focus on the long term. But a healthy time horizon when it comes to our money would be one that has a mix of all 3. We're not just ruminating on the present. We're not just thinking about the far future. We're focusing on life as it exists, both now and in the future. This same exercise is powerfully applied to romantic relationships. If your mind drifts to your relationship, are you thinking about primarily what's going on right now? The argument that you just had, or the fun time you just had, or the very next opportunity to see someone? The easy example here is with new love. No such thing, by the way. Love isn't what you're feeling in that new relationship. But that's a topic for not right now. That puppy love at the start of a relationship is tuned fully to the ultra short term. Daydreaming about getting married and having babies together doesn't count as long term in that case. Or on the other hand, are you thinking about the far future? How to really get to know each other? How to invest in that person and see them grow and succeed? All that you're going to do together decades from now. Considering the challenges and opportunities that you'll have together. Or again, everything that falls in between. How we think about our relationships and what we focus on, the time scale that reaches to when we ruminate on our relationship or on our relationships in general can tell us a lot about where our focus on our time scale is tuned to. Very short, very long, or a mix of all, ideally. Health might be the thing that is even more revealing. When we look at how we move our body and fuel our body, and the way that we think about that, this can tell us a whole lot. If we're just thinking about the next meal, the next opportunity to stuff our face with dessert, and then once we do, we're only thinking about the very next time that we can do that, or how guilty we feel about having done just that when we went overboard, that reveals our time scale in that area. Versus if we're thinking about our meals and nutrition in terms of how is this going to fuel my movement, both now and into the far future? What is this going to result in if I continue putting this fuel in the tank in the same quantity and of the same quality? That will reveal the timescale. When it comes to movement, are we consistently choosing the easy, less active path versus the harder, more active path? That almost always comes down to where we're focusing on from a time frame standpoint with our health. All these can be and are indicators of our timescale more broadly. And of course, there's good news. I mentioned this before, but our time scale and our default focus for time can be adjusted. It can be stretched. And now that we've been looking at some useful ways to identify where on the time scale we tend to be, we can now talk about how to stretch it. And by now, I mean next time. Okay. Thank you for investing in yourself and in those around you. I will talk to you next time. What? What do you mean I only care about the short term with my health? I literally just ate an apple.